Some pain lingers quietly with time. And then there are moments where it crashes in like a knife straight to the chest. Right in the very room where everyone believes you're the most respected person there. We don't tolerate deadweight here anymore. Her voice cut through the perfect morning like thunder. You're done, Martha. I sat there, on the 14th floor in the conference room where I'd spent the last 32 years of my life, listening to my daughter-in-law, Alexa Monroe, the newly appointed CEO of the very company I co-founded, announce my termination in front of 24 employees. Some of them I personally hired. Some I stayed up with through countless nights when this company was nothing more than an idea in my garage. No one said a word. No one dared. I looked around. Sarah, the head of HR, kept her eyes down. Jason, the same young man who used to call me Mama Martha, back when he was fresh out of college, couldn't meet my gaze, like a child caught doing something wrong. And Alexa, she smiled, smug, cold, certain I'd either break down in tears or beg to stay. But I didn't. I simply nodded. Good luck, I said. Then stood up, gathered my worn-out notebook, the same one I carried through our first deals, and walked out of the room that used to be a dream, now turned into an execution chamber. But just as my hand reached the door, it opened, and there, like something ripped from a scene no one could have written, stood Brandon. My son. The company's lead investor, fresh off a flight from San Francisco. The entire room froze. And me. I turned back and smiled, because they didn't know what I knew. And if you're watching this video right now, stick around until the very end. Because you're going to want to hear what happens when a mother is betrayed, but not broken. With nothing but an unconditional love, I exposed the game behind the game, and saved my son from the very woman he once trusted with his whole heart. Some pain lingers quietly through the years, and then there are moments when it hits like a blade straight through your chest. Right in the very room where everyone believes you're the one most respected. We don't tolerate deadweight here anymore. Her voice cracked through the morning air like thunder on a cloudless day. You're done, Martha. I sat there, on the 14th floor of the company I helped build, in the same conference room where I'd spent the last 32 years of my life, and I listened as my own daughter-in-law Alexa Monroe, the newly appointed CEO of the company I co-founded, fired me in front of 24 employees. Some of them I personally hired. Some I'd stayed up with during sleepless nights, back when this company was still just an idea scribbled in a spiral notebook in my garage. No one said a word. No one dared. I looked around. Sarah, the head of HR, lowered her eyes. Jason, the kid who used to call me Mama Martha, his first year out of college, avoided my gaze like a child caught in the wrong. And Alexa, she smiled, arrogant, icy, certain I would cry or break, but I didn't. I simply nodded. Good luck, I said. Then I stood, picked up my weathered notebook, the same one that carried our first contracts, and walked out of the room that used to feel like a dream. Now nothing more than a firing squad. But just as my hand touched the door, it opened, and standing there, like a twist no one saw coming, was Brandon. My son, the company's lead investor, fresh off a flight from San Francisco. The room fell completely silent. And me. I turned back and smiled, because they didn't know what I knew. And if you're watching this video right now, stay until the end. Because you're going to want to know what happens when a mother is betrayed, but not broken. And how, with nothing but an old father and a love that doesn't quit, I exposed the entire game, and saved my son from the woman he trusted most. I'd sat in that room hundreds of times before. The 14th floor boardroom with glass walls overlooking downtown Denver, where the morning light poured across the oak table like warm honey, where I signed our very first contract with a local grocery chain, where we laughed through our first company Christmas party, because Brandon wore a ridiculous long-eared bunny sweater Alexa had picked out as a funny gift. But that day, there was no laughter, only silence, and a verdict. The meeting was announced like any other quarterly review. I expected numbers, projections, strategy for the next fiscal year. I brought my handwritten notebook, same old habit, and a batch of homemade oat bars to share with the team, like I always did. Alexa arrived 5 minutes late, as usual, but this time, her face didn't carry that half-apologetic smile she usually wore. She walked in, crossed her legs at the head of the table, set her tablet down, and looked straight at me. Let's get straight to the point. The room froze. I felt the atmosphere shift with just that one sentence. As of today, Martha Lewis, your service is no longer required at Greenest Organics. No heads up. No private call. Not even a graceful retirement suggestion like they do with founders. Just one cold sentence, delivered in front of 23 people, many of whom once called me Mama Martha. I heard Sarah, our head of finance, inhale sharply like she was choking something down. Jason from logistics blinked fast, as if trying to find the words. But none came. No one stood. No one said a thing. It was just me and Alexa. With thank you for your contributions, she continued, voice level, and the most bitter part was how her words were wrapped in that fake corporate smile. But it's time for the next generation to take this company forward. We're streamlining the board. You no longer align with the company's direction. I sat there. Not a word, not a tear. I used to think if this moment ever came, I'd collapse. That I'd break down. That I'd beg for one last shot. Or at least demand an explanation. But instead I felt nothing but a calm emptiness. The stillness before a storm. I nodded. Gently. Understood. Good luck, Alexa. She didn't respond. I stood, gathered my things. My old notebook. The fountain pen my husband gave me on launch day. And the chipped ceramic mug I could never bring myself to replace. I walked out of that room like a woman walking away from a firing squad. But without bleeding. And just as my fingers touched the door handle, it opened. Leather shoes stepped in. A suitcase rolled behind. And that voice. Mom. Brandon. Fresh off a flight from San Francisco. He hadn't even made it to his office before the storm hit. I turned around. The room was still. Everyone looked at him, waiting to see which side he was on. I smiled, looked straight into my son's eyes. And with a voice steadier than I'd ever felt before, I said, Brandon. Sweetheart. We need to talk. I used to tell myself I was just being too sensitive. That the uneasiness I felt around Alexa was just a mother's instinct to protect her son. Not something real. Not something dangerous. I told myself that, more times than I can count. I remember the first night Brandon brought her home. It was a Saturday evening in early spring. The air was crisp, and the kitchen smelled of grilled rosemary chicken and fresh herbs. I'd spent the whole morning polishing my grandmother's old porcelain set. The one I only took out on truly special occasions. Brandon walked in with that bright, boyish look I hadn't seen on his face since his teenage years, since the first time he'd fallen in love. Mom, I want you to meet someone special, he said, turning toward the door. This is Alexa. Alexa Monroe. Tall, effortlessly blonde, with cool blue, gray eyes that looked like they belonged under stage lights. She wore a simple yet elegant dress when carried herself with a kind of calm confidence. The kind that makes everyone else feel just a bit smaller. Mrs. Lewis. I've heard so much about you, she said, extending her hand. Brandon talks about you constantly. Her handshake was firm, her gaze steady, unblinking. But something didn't quite match the smile. Like a perfectly tailored dress, made of synthetic fabric, shiny, but suffocating. Throughout dinner, she was perfectly polite. She complimented the food, asked about the old photos on the wall, talked about her time at Wharton, and her experience with consulting firms. She said everything a mother would want to hear, but I couldn't feel any of it. Then came a moment, a small one, when I was pouring lemonade into her glass, and she said, "Your home is so cozy." I smiled, but deep down, I felt a chill, not because of the word, cozy, but because of the way she said it. Like someone complimenting a quaint little cottage in a folk museum. That night, after they left, I stood at the sink washing glasses slowly. There was still a faint trace of red lipstick on the rim of one. The only sign she'd ever been in my kitchen. I picked up the phone and called the one person I could trust, my sister Lana. Something's not right, I told her. She's too perfect. But cold. Like every move she makes is premeditated. Lana laughed gently on the other end. Martha, you've always been skeptical of Brandon's girlfriends. Remember Jessica? You thought she was only with him for his bank account. No, she's married. With 3 kids. And her husband's a dentist. And she wasn't wrong. I had been wrong before. I've always kept Brandon close. He's all I have left after Richard passed. So this time, I tried. I tried to believe. I tried to let go of that gnawing doubt, to open my heart, to smile more, and ignore the cold glances Alexa gave me every time I talked about how I ran the company. I told myself maybe, just maybe, The next generation needed something different. A fresh perspective. A new kind of leadership. I tried to believe in Alexa. And that might have been the biggest mistake of my life. I couldn't sleep that night, after the meeting. After that clean cut from the very woman I once trusted as family. I came home feeling like I'd just walked off a battlefield. My house, the place that once echoed with laughter, Sunday dinners, and warmth, felt strangely hollow. No phone ringing, no emails, not a single message from Brandon. I made myself a cup of tea. The kind I always drink on nights when I need to think clearly. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at a plain cardboard box holding a few of my office things. My old fountain pen. A photo of Brandon on his graduation day, and a little cactus I'd cared for the last 3 years. I kept replaying the look in Alexa's eyes when she said it. We don't tolerate outdated people here more. A cold, empty, triumphant. I didn't cry. My heart just clenched like a tight, tangled knot. It wasn't the job title that hurt. It was the betrayal. I thought, if no one else stood by me, at least my son would know this was wrong. But Brandon wasn't there. He was in San Francisco for a tech conference. I knew his schedule. I had helped approve it just last week. I had just set my tea down when the phone vibrated. His name lit up the screen. I froze, then answered. Mom, are you okay? Alex has been texting me nonstop since this afternoon. She said you stepped down. What's going on? I tried to keep my voice calm. Where are you now? Just landed. I'll be home in 30 minutes. I'm heading straight from the airport. I gripped the armrest of the chair. Brandon, I think you should go straight to the office. There's something you need to see for yourself. There was a pause on the other end. Mom, you sound strange. What's happening? I closed my eyes. For the first time that day, my throat tightened. Just be there, tomorrow morning, before anyone else arrives. And don't call Alexa tonight. Why not? Because she'll do everything she can to keep you from hearing the truth. I didn't say goodbye. I hung up. And from that moment, I knew there was no going back. I stood up and reached into the pocket of my coat, pulling out a small USB stick. The one I'd used to back up everything I could access before walking out of that office. I didn't even know exactly what I was looking for. But deep down, I felt it. Alexa didn't fire me just to streamline operations. It was a cover. A smokescreen. Something bigger and darker was being set in motion. I opened my personal laptop, logged into the company's internal finance system. A place where I once held top-level access, though I hadn't used it in months. And oddly enough, my credentials still worked. I started searching on instinct. Unusual fund flows, strange transfers, secondary accounts. And then, 20 minutes in, I froze. My hand hovered over the mouse. Something was very wrong. I stared at the computer screen, my palms cold. Even though the house was still and silent. The internal account portal was open. And the numbers started to roll in. Numbers that didn't add up. Small transfers 1-500, 3-200, 4-800. At first I assumed they were new vendor costs. Maybe shipping, logistics, product testing. But then I noticed a pattern. Every single transfer was sent to a business account under the name Crimson Ivy LLC, registered in Nevada, a state notorious for protecting the anonymity of company owners. I'd never heard that name. Not once. Not in our vendor list, not in any approved partner database. It didn't belong to Green Nest. I pulled up the accounting detail sheet and filtered by Crimson Ivy. There were 23 transactions in the past 6 months, and each one had grown in value. From a few $1,000s here and there to one final transfer, just under $50,000, processed less than 12 hours ago. My chest tightened. I clicked into the Electronic Signature Authorization tab. Green Nest system requires 2-step verification for any transaction over $10,001 to initiate. 1 to approve. 2 names appeared on the screen, initiated by Alexa Monroe. Approved by Brandon Lewis. I froze. No, that can't be right. I know my son. Brandon doesn't approve large transfers without a full breakdown. He's careful. Thorough. And more importantly, he's been in San Francisco all week. There's no way he could have approved this from our Denver office. I clicked the timestamp. Tuesday, 11:42 a.m. I opened the flight tracking app. Brandon's flight took off at 9:15 a.m. And by 11:42, he was flying over Utah. I know, because I texted him that morning. Fly safe, sweetheart. And he'd replied, we'll text you when I land. I sat in silence. This wasn't a hunch anymore. This wasn't a mother's instinct. This was evidence. Alexa hadn't just orchestrated my firing to eliminate oversight. She was funneling money out of the company and forging my son's approval to cover her tracks. I took a long breath. Not because of the money, though nearly 200,000 siphoned is no small matter, but because my son would be shattered when he found out. I started printing everything: transaction histories, signature logs, recipient verification, flight records, everything neatly organized, cross-referenced, dated. I exported it all to a second USB, backed it up to my personal cloud. Each step I took was cold, mechanical. I was becoming someone else entirely. When the printer fell silent, I gathered the stack of papers and returned to my seat at the kitchen table. The wall clock ticked. Steady, unforgiving. I stared at it, waiting for the hands to hit 500 a.m. Because I knew Brandon would walk through that door at any moment. And when he did, I wouldn't be the mother who washed dishes and stayed silent anymore. I would be the one to hand him the truth. There was a knock at the door, right on cue. Just as dawn brushed at the edge of the sky. I had been waiting, no sleep, no rest, just me, a cold cup of coffee, a stack of printed documents, and a small USB resting silently in my palm. I opened the door. Brandon stood there, his leather jacket still clinging to the scent of jet fuel, hair tousled, eyes wary and confused. He had just landed a few hours ago, and now stood in front of me like he was 12 years old again, lost, looking for answers. Mom. What's going on? Alexa said you resigned. But the team says you were fired, and something about embezzlement. I motioned him inside. Without a word, I pointed to the papers laid across the kitchen table: bank records, wire transfers, account names, digital signatures, timestamps, and at the very top, his flight record. He flipped through the pages slowly. By the last sheet, I noticed his hand shaking slightly. This is my signature. But I never approved any of this. And Crimson Ivy. Mom. I've never even heard of that account. I sat down across from him, voice as calm as I could manage. You didn't sign it, I know. That's why I'm still awake. The Brandon looked up. His eyes were red. You're saying Alexa did this? I didn't respond right away. I let him look at me, let the silence speak, because sometimes truth doesn't need volume. No way, he whispered. She loves me. She's helped grow the company. I interrupted him, gently. No bitterness. No blame. You know, Brandon, when someone truly loves you, they don't hide things. They don't forge signatures. And they sure don't drain money from the company your family built. He stood up, pacing across the kitchen. His hands locked behind his head, like he was holding his thoughts together by force. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Maybe she was just moving funds temporarily. Or maybe. I stepped closer, placed my hand on his shoulder. You can explain anything to me, sweetheart, except your signature showing up while you were 35,000 feet in the air. The truth doesn't need excuses, it just needs to be seen. He stopped, looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw it. That flicker. That quiet, shattering moment when denial gives way to realization. A long silence passed. Mom. His voice cracked. If Alexa really did this, if she betrayed me, betrayed you, what do I even do? I held his hand, the same hand that once clung to mine on his first day of school. You don't need all the answers right now. You just need to know I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. Brandon took a deep breath. And I saw it in him, something shift. He was no longer the boy who needed protecting. He was becoming the man ready to defend what was left. Mom. What do we do now? I looked him straight in the eyes. Didn't blink. We go to the office. Before she has time to erase the evidence. We arrived at the office before the sun had even fully risen. The building was dark. Only a soft amber glow hummed from the reception lights. The parking lot was empty. Not a single soul in the building yet. It was so quiet. We could hear the faint rattle of a window pane shifting in the wind. Brandon punched in the security code. The glass doors slid open with a familiar chill. But this time, it wasn't the air conditioning. It was the truth waiting inside. We walked in silence. Every step echoed memories. The mornings Brandon used to run here at 5 a.m., testing out his first order management software. The nights I stayed late, handwriting thank you notes to new suppliers. And later, the days Alexa floated in, graceful as a breeze, leaving behind the slow erosion of power. She wasn't here yet. We still had time. Brandon powered up the central conference room computer. One of only 3 machines with direct access to the internal financial system. The others belonged to Alexa and me. I reached into my coat pocket and handed him the USB. I backed everything up. But you need to see it for yourself. He plugged it in, opened the file, and locked in on the screen. His eyes scanned each line, the transfer logs, the timestamps, the signatures, the registered business address in Nevada. This isn't some accounting mistake. I nodded, then placed another folder on the table. The LC registration for Crimson Ivy, filed under the name Amanda Monroe. Brandon's brow furrowed. Amanda. Her birth name, I said quietly. She legally changed it when she moved to Denver. Alexa Monroe was once Amanda J. Monroe. I hired a private investigator. Brandon looked at me, a mix of surprise, pain, but no anger. You've been investigating her. Since when? Since she walked through my kitchen like it was a museum exhibit. I've stayed quiet long enough for her to believe I was blind. He turned back to the screen. I watched as his face froze when he reached the final section. A sealed civil lawsuit, Chicago, 2017. Amanda Monroe, accused of embezzling over $85,000 from a nonprofit organization. The case had been settled out of court. No criminal charges. No headlines. Every party signed a non-disclosure agreement. I placed one final item in front of him. A printed photograph, taken by a surveillance team. Alexa, seated in a luxury restaurant. Fingers intertwined with a man we'd never seen. She was laughing, relaxed and unmistakably herself, but not the self Brandon knew. Who is this guy? Brandon asked quietly. Marcus LeBlanc, I replied. Lives in New York. Former co-worker of Amanda's. They signed a lease together. An apartment just blocks from our headquarters. Brandon clenched his fist. She's living a double life. I said nothing, because in that moment, there was nothing left to say. He had to see it. He had to feel it. That the woman he called wife, his partner, his anchor, was nothing more than a well-crafted mask. Truth doesn't shout. It waits until the pain is loud enough to finally make us open our eyes. Or 18:59 a.m. Brandon sat at the head of the table. The same room where, just one day ago, I'd been fired. But today, I wasn't sitting there as a founder emeritus, or the once glorified advisor. I was sitting beside my son. As a mother. As an ally. Ready to watch the truth finally come to light. The room slowly filled. Department heads. Finance. Legal, HR. Operations. All present under Brandon's emergency summons. Confused. Whispering. Not knowing what was about to unfold. And then at exactly 9:02 a.m., Alexa Monroe walked in. Blonde hair in a perfect ponytail. Designer suit tailored to intimidate. That same polished smile, calculated down to the millimeter. But her eyes flickered. Just for a second. When she saw me sitting in what should have been an empty chair. Oh, she said, masking surprise. Didn't expect to see you here, Martha. I didn't respond. Brandon stood. His voice calm. Steady. But layered with something new, something I'd never heard from him before. Alexa, please. Take a seat. She crossed her legs, tilted her head. Is this some kind of emergency meeting? I wasn't notified. It is. Brandon interrupted. And you'll understand why in just a moment. Silence. He opened his laptop, connected it to the large screen. And one by one, the files appeared. Transaction logs with Crimson Ivy LLC, forged signatures. The Nevada business registration under the name Amanda Monroe. Scanned court records from a sealed case in Chicago. No one moved. No one spoke. Alexa sat frozen, but I saw her fingers tighten, ever so slightly, into a fist. What exactly are you trying to say? She asked, voice still composed. Brandon stepped to the center of the room. I'm saying you've been stealing from this company. For over 6 months. I'm saying you forged my signature to move money through shell accounts. And I'm saying your real name isn't Alexa. It's Amanda. A beat, then a smirk. That's a bold accusation, Brandon. I hope you have proof. I stood and placed the USB on the table. It's all here. Surveillance photos, hotel receipts, private investigator reports. She looked at me, not with contempt this time, but with something far more telling. Fear. So what now? She asked. You gonna call the cops? Have me arrested in front of your entire staff? You think that's good for the company's image? Brandon stared straight at her. You should have thought of that before it betrayed everything we built. Then he turned to the room. To everyone who stood by us through years of growth, you deserve to know the truth. The woman you called CEO is not who she claimed to be. But this moment, doesn't define us. It reminds us who we are. Alexa suddenly stood. You can't prove intent. You can't prove I knew. I'll get a lawyer. You should, I said quietly. You'll need one. Right then, a knock at the door. Two men in gray suits stepped in. One flashed a badge. Amanda Monroe, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Alexa froze. Body stiff, like the life had been drained from her spine. And then, mask slipping, she screamed. You don't know what you're everything. You think this is over? Brandon didn't flinch. No, Alexa. It's just beginning. The agents cuffed her and walked her out. No applause, no co-pity, just silence, not the silence of confusion, but the silence of relief. The office slowly emptied after the meeting. Voices faded, elevator doors closed, footsteps disappeared down the hall. No one spoke loudly, no one whispered behind backs. Because everyone understood, today wasn't a victory. Today was the day truth stepped forward. And truth often leaves deeper cuts than lies ever could. Brandon stood at the window on the 14th floor. The last golden light of the day brushed across his face, illuminating the dark circles under his eyes, and the creases in his brow I'd never noticed before. I said nothing. Some moments are held best in silence, and right now, my son needed that silence, to sit with the ruins of the trust he just lost. After a while, his voice broke through, low, weighted, like it rose from somewhere deep inside him. Mom, I slept next to her for 3 years. Ate with her. Worked with her. Told her I loved her. Told her I trusted her. Talked about our future. He paused. And none of it was real. I stepped closer. Placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Not everything was a lie, Brandon. She was. But your feelings weren't. He turned toward me. His eyes were red, not with anger, but from a quiet emptiness eating at him from the inside. I feel so stupid, Mom. How did I not see it? Why didn't I listen to you? I squeezed his shoulder. Because you're a good man, and good people don't assume others are capable of cruelty. He let out a short, hollow laugh. A laugh that hurt more than it healed. She used to say I was weak. That I trusted people too easily. That I wouldn't survive without her. I looked at him. Really looked at him. My boy. The same boy who once stayed up all night coding our first website in the garage. The same man who built an organic empire with me. Brick by brick, bite by bite. She was wrong. I said, my voice firmer than ever. She couldn't see your strength. But I could. And I've seen it since the day you dropped out of college, just to help your mother chase a crazy dream. He turned away. But I saw him wipe a tear. What now, Mom? Now you live, you heal, you learn to trust again, but this time, start with trusting yourself. The rest will follow. He nodded, and then we sat down, in that same boardroom, a place that marked the end of my story yesterday, now becoming the beginning of his. No more Alexa. No more masks, just a mother and her son, sitting together in the honest, shattered pieces of something they once called love. 6 months later. The room they once pushed me out of like a historic artifact is now the same room where I sit each morning, brewing coffee and reviewing the shipping schedules. Everything's changed. No more Alexa. No more reports printed on perfume, scented paper. No more meetings full of flashy graphs no one truly understood. All that's left is clarity. Green Nest isn't a brand built on slogans written by outsourced consultants anymore. Green Nest is once again the child of sincerity. Brandon didn't step in as CEO, not yet. He needed time to heal, to find his footing, to rediscover the person he was before everything unraveled. But he's here. Every day. Step by step. Together with the board, we restructured the company. We rewrote our slogan, real food, real people, real roots. 3 simple lines. But behind them, a journey back to who we were. We canceled the tangled distribution deals Alexa once pushed through. Shifted our focus back to local markets, where our roots first took hold. I'm no longer the executive vice president. Now, I'm a mentor, a guide, a listener, and the most beautiful part is, the young team listens. Not because I'm Martha Lewis, but because I've walked the road they're just beginning. Brandon started coming in earlier. He eats lunch with the team, helps in the kitchen during office potlucks, and for the first time in years, I see him smile. Not the polite, polished smile he wore when Alexa was around, but a real smile, easy and armored, his own. One afternoon, as I was watering the little cactus on my desk, the one that withered during Alexa's reign, but now stood green and proud. Brandon tapped gently on my glass door. Mom. Yes. I want you to meet someone. I looked up. And there she was. A young woman with soft curls and warm brown eyes, wearing a slightly wrinkled button-down and plain jeans. "Hi," she said with a shy smile. "I'm Emily. I teach science at the elementary school near Brandon's place." I smiled back, surprised, cautious maybe, but above all at peace. We had dinner together a few nights later. Emily spoke gently, no pretense, no performance, no effort to impress. She didn't try to win me over. And perhaps that's exactly what made me trust her. Brandon never introduced her as his girlfriend. He didn't have to. The way he looked at her, that was enough. And in that moment, I realized something. When something is healed from the root, it doesn't just survive. It blooms. My business has weathered the storm. And my family, fractured, doubted, scared, is slowly being stitched back together. With the strongest glue of all, trust. Once lost, and now found again. Someone once asked me, if you could go back to a year ago, would you do anything differently? I thought about it for a long time, not because I didn't have an answer, but because the question no longer matters. Sometimes, life doesn't ask us to choose again. It simply asks us to move forward, with eyes wide open. I've known loss. I was betrayed by its held like a daughter. Someone who called me, Mum, with a sweetness that felt like it would last forever. But not every mum is said with love, and not every wedding ring is made of truth. I'm not saying this out of bitterness. I say it because I know there are thousands of people out there, just like me, who once gave their trust to the wrong person. Who once stayed silent, thinking, maybe I'm the only one who sees through the mask. But let me say, this sacrifice is never an excuse for silence. Brandon, my son, once told me he was more afraid of losing Alexa than he was of losing himself. And I understood, because there was a time I thought, if I have to lose my place at the company, so be it. As long as my son is happy. But true happiness can't be built on deception. There can't be a if one person is always wearing a mask. So if you're hearing this, and you've been second guessing your own feelings, if you're in a relationship, a job, a life that makes you stay quiet more than it lets you be real, you're not alone. And you deserve the truth. I lost a lot on this journey, my reputation, control, trust, but I found something far more valuable: a son who chose to face the truth. A company now driven by values, and a heart, finally, at peace with itself. So if someone's trying to convince you that you're not enough, not strong, can't live without them, remember this: no one belongs at the center of your life but you. And kindness. Kindness is never weakness. You've just watched a story inspired by real life. A story about family, about trust, and about silent resistance. If any part of this story feels like yours, drop a comment below. We read every word, and maybe, just maybe, the next story we tell will be yours.